Hello and welcome. We begin with the latest news from Sudan, where heavy bombardment by the warring sides, the army and the paramilitary RSF, has given the ongoing civil war a new bloody turn. At least 176 people have been killed in 2 days of strikes by the two sides. The United Nations and rights groups have blamed foreign powers for propelling this fight, and the United Arab Emirates has emerged as the foreign player most invested in the war. Now, the UN experts and diplomats claim that dozens of cargo planes from the UAE have flooded a small airstrip in Chad since the civil war erupted in Sudan. They suspect UAE is funneling arms across the Chadian border into Sudan. According to flight data and documents, at least 86 flights from the UAE have headed for an airstrip in Amdjarass in eastern Chad since April of 2023. 75% of them were operated by carriers that have also been accused by the United Nations of ferrying Emirati weapons to a warlord in Libya. Sudan's army-backed government, headed by General Abdel Fattah Al-Burhan, has accused the paramilitary RSF, led by Mohamed Hamdan Dagalo, also known as Hemedti, of launching UAE-made drones from neighbouring Chad. Abu Dhabi, however, has dismissed these allegations, calling them ludicrous. Earlier, it also rejected a UN report that cited credible allegations. The UAE was providing military support via the Chad airstrip to the Sudanese RSF. Now, the West Asian country says it has been sending aid for Sudan via Chad, not arms. The UAE government says it had sent 159 relief flights with over 10,000 tons of food and medical aid, including supplies to a field hospital it has established in Amdjarass. Now, according to reports at a meeting with senior US officials, the UAE delegates had dropped their denial of backing the RSF after they were shown intelligence that Washington had collected. So let's understand why the United Arab Emirates has emerged as a key player in not just Sudan, but in the entire region. Since the Arab Spring uprising in 2011, the Gulf nation has intervened in conflicts from Yemen to Libya. One of its main aims has been to roll back Islamist groups, including the Muslim Brotherhood, which Abu Dhabi sees as a threat to domestic stability. Now, Islamists associated with the rule of the ousted Sudanese president, Omar al-Bashir, have long held influence with the Sudan army. Experts say to counter this, the UAE began backing the RSF, which has altered the balance of power in the conflict and has prolonged the war. Abu Dhabi also views resource-rich and strategically located Sudan as an opportunity to expand its influence in West Asia and East Africa. Since 2018, it has invested over $6 billion in Sudan, including foreign reserves in the central bank and a Red Sea port. According to reports, the RSF's General Hemedti acts as a custodian of the UAE's interests in Sudan. Now, these include gold, the main driver of the conflict, and agricultural products. The UAE also imports 90% of its food supply and has food security high on its priority. So agricultural produce is shipped to the UAE through the Red Sea. The United Nations has repeatedly accused foreign players of prolonging the war in Sudan. Apart from the UAE, Russia and Libya have also been accused of supporting the paramilitary RSF, and Egypt, Saudi Arabia and Iran have reportedly been aiding the Sudanese army. The Chadian airstrip at Amdjarass is not the only route that has been identified by experts as a channel of weapons into Sudan. The war-torn country is surrounded by major arms trafficking hubs. Apart from Chad, weapons and ammunition are smuggled in through countries like Libya, the Central African Republic, South Sudan, and Uganda. As foreign players continue to fuel the Sudan war, the prospects of peace remain elusive. The brutal civil war has set off one of the world's worst famines in decades. Over 20,000 people have been killed, around 9 million have been displaced, and around 25 million, which is almost half of the population of Sudan, are in dire need of humanitarian aid. And as the Sudan war inches closer to its 2-year mark, it stands as a glaring example of the failure of the international community to address one of the worst humanitarian crises in the world. Now, for more on this, we have with us international affairs expert Musa Ndunge, who is joining us from Dundee in the United Kingdom. Welcome to Firstpost.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, the UN experts have claimed that dozens of UAE flights to Chad Airstrip are funneling weapons into Sudan, fueling this ongoing civil war. Given the UAE's denial and its insistence that the flights are solely for humanitarian aid, what evidence supports the UN's allegations, and how credible is this evidence in the context of the war?
Well, thank you so much for that question. You know, on the first point, in terms of the evidence that is being provided, various video footage have been provided to various media houses, among them Reuters, for example, has reported seeing video footage that points to the fact that the kind of goods that have been shipped through to Sudan via Chad by the UAE have in fact been that of military type, rather than the type of labeling that you would associate with goods that are of a humanitarian makeup. So, for example, some of the things that have been noted by UN investigators who are experts in this particular area is the type of crates that have been used in terms of these particular goods, you know, noting not only the type, but the manner in which these goods were being stacked, as well as the fact that many of these goods were labeled with the UAE flag.
Yeah.
And what the UN have pointed out is that in actual fact, when looking at the type of labeling, it seems that it would point out to that of a military type rather than any type of civilian goods that wouldn't be used for military purposes. And this is the evidence that has been pointed out against the UAE.
Yeah. And how significant is the role of international actors, including the UAE, in shaping the dynamics of the Sudan civil war? And what impact could these alleged arms supplies have on the prospects for peace and for stability in the region?
Well, yeah, there are various international players, you know, as we have had in previous conversations discussed, right? You think of the role of countries such as, you know, Saudi Arabia, such as Egypt. Both countries have played a very critical role, including Ethiopia, in trying to get some sort of a peace arrangement. The challenge here is you have various sides supporting various factions. So, for example, while the UAE seems to be on the side of the RSF, countries like Russia, which has played a critical role in this conflict, switched support initially from the RSF and until it supported the Sudanese military forces and argued around the issue of Sudanese sovereignty. And even in a recent, UN Security Council resolution that was proposed by the United Kingdom as well as Sierra Leone, Russia vetoed that resolution, which would have called all the players towards a cessation of arms and towards the negotiation table. Unfortunately, Russia vetoed that notion. The challenge here, Alyson, is again the role of the AU and whether the AU really has an ability to exercise some form of a role as a neutral arbitrator in this particular conflict. For as long as nations are still viewing this conflict within narrow nationalistic interests, then it is unlikely, Alyson, that we will see a resolution to this conflict.
Yeah. And Musa, what measures can the international community, including the United Nations, and there you mentioned the AU, and neighbouring countries like Chad, take to ensure transparency in the use of airstrips and the cargo that is being transported, especially in these conflict zones like Sudan?
Well, this is a very challenging issue here. One of the key things that we may likely have to see as an intervention is perhaps in the similar vein as was done in Libya, though it was quite controversial, would be a proposed no-fly zone in that particular region. Now, the challenge with that is then you then have to make the argument around then how do you move humanitarian aid through, and that then becomes the challenge here. I think the key thing is, again, what kind of interventions can the United Nations truly present, given the gridlock that is being presented here? And one would hope, which is perhaps for South Africa, just to bring them in, that this would then be a seminal opportunity for a country like South Africa, given that it's taking over the leadership of the G20, to elevate this particular issue towards its rightful place. And unfortunately, we're not seeing that being done. And as long as we see a proliferation of weapons transporting in that region, then it is unlikely, to answer the previous question, it is unlikely that we are going to see the heat being removed in terms of this conflict. And so the question is, where is the AU? Where are the organizations that are supposed to promote peace and security? They are not there. And then the question is, what role do, like South Africa, like Egypt, that have that kind of heft and influence in the continent, do in terms of getting both sides to the negotiation table according to previously agreed settlements?
Yeah. Absolutely. Musa, it's always great to have you on the show. Thank you very much for your analysis there.
Thank you so much for having me.